Has anyone ever ridden the log flume ride at an old school amusement park? Anyone here? Ever? It's a lot of you. It's kind of like a hollowed out tree that you get in, and it's like, oh, well, that's a little wet. That's nice. And then it's, oh, there aren't any seatbelts. That's interesting. And then it travels slowly through a narrow waterway. One might call it like a river of guaranteed demise. I don't know what you would call it. And then it takes you up an incline until you're at the top, and then it levels off, and it tips down and plummets for maybe like 1 or 2 eternities. I remember thinking on the way down, what if this never ends? It lasted maybe 10 or 15 seconds, but my most acute experience was, please let this be over. The truth is that those 10 to 15 seconds is a very specific kind of time. The time after we've left one known place, but before we've arrived at a destination, the in-betweeny time, where we don't have any control, and we know it, and we don't know how or when this story will end, but we are deeply invested in that ending. Sometimes it is thrilling, and sometimes it can cause great distress. I was recently talking to a friend, and he said to me, waiting for this election is going to kill me. That's the feeling. For months now, we've ridden a roller coaster of debates and new candidates, conventions, hopelessness to hope, neck-and-neck polling data, assassination attempts, for goodness sake, threats, misinformation, manipulation, and anticipation. Untethered, we find ourselves in that in-betweeny time, and it tosses us around, lifting us up to euphoric highs and dropping us to despairing lows with some unknown outcome. This kind of experience is most often referred to as being in a state of liminality, and it may be the best term to describe the times that we are living in now. Liminality is a term first coined by Arnold van Gennep in France in 1909. I obviously do not speak French. And he used it to describe rituals of transition, when a person is no longer one thing, but is not yet the next thing. Like a tribal ritual of sending a young person out into the wilderness to fend for themselves, hunt their food, face their demons, and grow in spirit and soul and self through trial, as they shed the identity of child and return as an adult. That time that they're out there is considered liminal time. In Latin, limen means threshold, as we picture a crossing over from one state of being to another. But to get to that new state requires us to stay for some undetermined amount of time in the nebulous space, a kind of wilderness, real or metaphorical. It's a very powerful kind of time, actually. Theologian Richard Rohr writes, all transformation takes place here. We have to allow ourselves to be drawn out of business as usual and remain patiently on the threshold where we are betwixt and between the familiar and the completely unknown. There alone is our old world left behind, where we are not yet sure of the new existence. That's a good space, he says, of the liminal, where genuine newness can begin. Get there often, and stay there as long as you can by whatever means possible. It's the realm where God can best get at us, because our false certitudes are finally out of the way. This is the sacred space where the old world is able to fall apart, and a bigger world is revealed. It's an extraordinary notion, this mystical time full of creativity where anything can happen, and we can become something more. And it can also be very challenging. We may not have to brave the wild animals of a moonless night, but liminal time, with its unexpected plot points and unwritten endings. It's just the perfect environment for feeling disoriented, anxious, or even anguished. So let's put a pin for a minute in the notion that liminality is something to seek out. We'll come back to it soon. And let's spend some time in the part where, unless we can make it through a liminal time, we'll never get to what might be desirable about it. And let's note, there are some liminal experiences in life that will just never be desirable. And we need to be able to make it through those too. Jewish tradition offers us a deep conversation, both about what we can do with liminal time and also how we can survive it. Survival first. It's not just the coming election, but we've also been living in liminal time for a year in Israel and Gaza and now Lebanon. Our nerves frayed, our hearts traumatized. We get news of a freed hostage, but then Hirsch and his friends are murdered. 750,000 hopeful Israelis in the streets of Tel Aviv, and then ever more Palestinian children are killed. Another hostage deal on the table so close we dare to believe it, but then it falls apart again. We're tossed about by the storm that swirls around us as we look ahead for some ending, but find nothing solid to step onto. And in our homes, too, we face turbulent liminal periods. Maybe your family has lived through this kind of time while trying to conceive a first or maybe a second child. My family has lived that story. You agonize. Will it turn out the way we want with the child that we're dreaming of? Each month there's a hopeful attempt, and then it fails again and again. And we cannot know or control this ending that we are deeply invested in. We have only to live through the storm as it has its way with us. Or a diagnosis that leads to tests, hope, appointments, and disappointments, but no crystal ball to reveal the ending. A lost job and a journey towards finding a new one, a struggling child or a difficult patch in a marriage, a tragic loss, letting go of a dying loved one, or wondering if you'll ever find your beloved. Living in liminal time can be exhausting. We can lose sleep. We can lose a grip on our own identity. We can grow thin of spirit and joy, run out of patience, and grow in anger. Pastor Susan Beaumont, author and expert in liminality, asks, why is the disorientation that we experience in liminal time, personal or communal, so intolerable? It stems from the fact, she writes, that we resist the unknowing, the loss of control in our own destiny. Of course we do. Now, the truth is that liminal experiences are actually happening all the time. We rarely know our endings, and that is often fine. But sometimes, and right now, liminality feels so acute and so protracted that we need to figure out how to navigate it. So what do we do when we reach that level of intolerability? Jewish tradition draws our attention towards Noah and his ark. You might remember that in the generation of Noah, the people of the world have become lawless and corrupt. And God has decided to bring a great flood to destroy everything and start over. But God is pleased with Noah and so wants to save him and his family, and less critically for this metaphor, 2 of each animal. So God commands Noah, saying, Aseh lecha teva, make for yourself a teva, an ark. And Noah does as God commands and builds this ark and fills it with family and the animals, and then it rains and rains and rains. The waters rise. The storm is loud, swirling all around him with pounding waves and punishing winds. But Noah is safe inside the refuge of his teva, his ark. It's not that the storm isn't happening. He can feel it. But it's not penetrating his body. It's not disastrous to his being. He can navigate this storm from his place of refuge, even as it seems to go on endlessly. In a writing called the Nitivot Shalom, Rabbi Shalom Berezovsky found in the commandment, Aseh lecha teva, make for yourself an ark, the language of inner refuge. When there is chaos all around, when the waves are rising, when the storm is threatening to dash you against the rocks, and there is no end in sight, he guides us. Aseh lecha teva, make for yourself an ark, to identify in our bodies, in our center, a teva, a refuge from the tempest swirling all around us. He wrote, just as Noah's ark functioned with regard to the whole of the world, so too it functions for us as individuals. A protective power that God gave us, a pina tehora, one pure spot amidst all of those things that cause chaos. As human beings, we have a great many powers, but hastening the end of the story or the storm is not among them. So we need a tool to help us come out whole on the other side, whenever that might be. That tool, according to many teachers of Chassidut, is this teva. Now, maybe the idea of finding a refuge inside of you feels entirely foreign. It's not how you think about God or spirituality, or it sounds a little too woo-woo, and you're not feeling it. That's okay. But, or rather, and, what if we gave it a chance to be true anyway? That just by virtue of being human, you have in you, and we have in us, a refuge placed in us that can hold us steady throughout our liminal storylines. According to the Nitivot Shalom, this teva is always there, it has always been there, and once we know that, we cannot unknow that. Rabbi Berezovsky writes, it is our teva that saves us from the worst situations. I want to invite you to put a hand on your chest or your stomach or somewhere on the core of your body, a place that you feel is comforting, grounding, solid. And close your eyes if you want to, and take a deep breath. Now picture a storm swirling all around you, a real storm with winds and pelting rains and dark clouds sweeping in. But it's not touching you. You are in it, but you have this teva, this pina tehora, this one untouched corner in you, wherever your hand is. Right there. Your refuge is solid. Imagine this teva as a comforting shape to you. It takes up space. It steadies you. You recognize this storm. It's unpleasant. It's ominous. It wants to carry you away with it into its ups and downs and thrash you about and take you apart piece by piece, but it can't. Because you have this refuge like Noah had. No matter what is happening outside of you, you are still you and whole. You can open your eyes. The storm itself rages on. It's on the news every day. It sends your phone notifications that you can't figure out how to turn off. It's on your work calendar for tomorrow, or in the next call from your doctor, or in the voice of your loved one, and we will still have to wonder, will this end well, or with a great sadness that I will have to learn to live through? It's not that we'll never be rolled or hurt by the storm. It's just as ferocious and as long. But our teva can hold us through its turbulent waters so that we may not be destroyed by it. And while we don't have to do anything to earn this teva, there are ways to tend it and to know it more intimately. The Nitivot Shalom suggests that there are access points all around us. He says that Shabbat is part teva, that we can find refuge there in our prayer and in our rest and our joy. He says the ancient words of Torah are part teva, securing us to our history, ancestors, and values. He says that being in sacred community is part teva, teaching when people of good character bind themselves to one another in unity. It is a form of Noah's Ark. Surely for many of us, CBE is also part teva, because that's how you and we have made it. We can grab onto the people and rituals of Jewish life to steady us until we find dry ground to step onto. And then, fortified by our refuge, in some, maybe even many, liminal periods, we may be able to turn towards the next question. So let's say I can survive this log flume of life. What might we do with liminal time? With a war that seems to have broken everything we know, with an election that is the most consequential of our lifetimes, with a planet warming and changing in shocking ways, even in some, though surely not all, of our own personal liminal stories. What can we do with that time? Ed Catmull, the co-founder of Pixar, once said, "There's a sweet spot between the known and the unknown where originality happens. The key is to be able to linger there without panicking." Even as we are developing our teva, what is this originality that he speaks of? Where new and bigger worlds begin and all things are possible, where transformation can happen. And what could we become and dream and try if we linger there? Jewish tradition also understands liminality to be a time of extraordinary creativity. In as early as 2nd century rabbinic midrash, the rabbis imagine a liminal time called Bein Hashmashot. Bein Hashmashot, the twilight of creation, which takes place after the 6 days of creation are complete, but before the 7th day, Shabbat, has begun. It's a time that belongs to no day. It is a threshold between the known and the unknown, between creation and rest, between beginning and everything that would come next. And it is magical. The rabbis say that in this time, Bein Hashmashot, 10 things were created. And then they tag on a bunch more. Some of them are the rainbow after the flood, the manna we were fed in the wilderness, the mouth of the earth that swallowed Korach, the tablets, the letters, Moses' grave, Miriam's well, and the shamir, which is a teeny tiny worm, the ram in the thicket, the staff of Moses, and more. How does God use liminal time? God creates the ingredients and conditions that would one day be needed to make the future into the world that God most wants it to be, to shape what will happen after the storm subsides. Liminality is not just anxious time or time to get through as quickly as we can, but if we are able, it could be a time for extraordinary world and future-shaping creativity. For example, Bein Hashmashot, God dreamt up the shamir, which is a tiny worm that one day, thousands of years later, will be used to cut and hew the stones of the temple in Jerusalem. Why? We learn from Ramban's commentary on Exodus that in that holy place where God and humanity will one day meet, no weapons of war should ever touch those stones. It will be aspirationally a realm only of peace. That is the future that God wants for the people and the world. And so in the wide open time of liminality, the shamir is born and waits at the ready for its use. God imagined a coming world where all people would be free. And so, Bein Hashmashot, God created a staff for Moses to carry into Pharaoh's palace generations later, demanding our freedom, programming into the future the conditions needed to stand up against a tyrant who would oppress our people or any people. Bein Hashmashot, God creates the ram in the thicket that would stop Abraham's hand from sacrificing his son Isaac, to set in motion a world in which there must be an alternative to hurting a child. And the rainbow that would end the flood in Noah's story, a necessary ingredient for a future in which hope is woven even into our darkest times. I want to propose that what we can best do in liminal time is just like this. to begin creating the tools and the conditions, miraculous as they may need to be, to shape our future for the shores that we hope to land on when these storms finally subside. Liminality, as painful as it can be, is a time to take risks, to dream, to try things we otherwise would never try, to ask questions. What do we want the next chapter to look and feel like? And what will need to be in place to pull that off? The anthropologist Victor Turner wrote, "Liminality may perhaps be regarded as a realm of pure possibility, whence novel configurations of ideas and relations may arise." Take this election season for just one example. I know that so many of our community are door knocking and postcarding and phone banking. Kol hakavod, truly. What if we also leaned into Turner's assertion and the Midrash's proposition that here, bein hashmashot, novel configurations of ideas and relations may arise? What is the world we want after November 5th? We are living now in a time of extreme divisiveness, distrust, and a true inability to see the humanity in people who disagree. That future is a dangerous one. If we don't want that when we reach the opposite shore, what do we want? And could we begin developing now the ingredients and conditions that we will need for that world? What kind of conversations, what kind of novel relations could we try having with people who disagree with us? Could we try to create ears that know how to listen, minds that know how to be curious, hearts that know how to love even when we fiercely disagree? Could we lay the foundations here, bein hashmashot, to care about each other's families or desires for safety or dreams for their future, even if some are red and some are blue? It's radical, I know, but when else should we start talking about it? You know, creating a worm that could cut through stone was also kind of a radical move. And that's just the election political discourse and the soul of our country. What if we started creating bein hashmashot of the Israel-Hamas-Hezbollah war, of climate change, of the AI boom, of rising anti-Semitism and hate of all kinds? In these liminal spaces that sometimes feel like chaotic storms, we could hunker down and white-knuckle it until it's over. Or could we use this liminal time for unparalleled creativity to build for what comes next? And yes, that will take work. It will take imagination and discernment and understanding and courage. But liminal time, before things are locked in again, could be our workshop. And in our own lives, and more gently now, in the midst of our profoundly painful unknowns, what space might we find even there to take a risk and build something important for once the storm has passed? How might we transform in the wilderness of the unknown? Bein hashmashot, might we come closer to the one who is dying? Use this time to deepen our trust with our family and friends. Look inward to emerge more clear about what matters to us really. This is not silver lining hunting. It's just surviving the storm with our teva and trying to create for the world that we want when it's over. These hours of Yom Kippur are surely a heightened liminal time too. The gates are open, but they are closing. We are invested in an ending that we don't know, and we're nearing the hour when we'll be thrown right back into regular time, work, school, projects, making lunches, paying bills. What is still possible today that will feel less possible tomorrow? What work are we open to right now that maybe after the gates close, the air will feel too rigid to do? Are there things we might create even now for a future as close as tomorrow? What is your Yom Kippur Shamir? Maybe a family WhatsApp group to weave your family together as this year unfolds. It's not a tiny magical worm, but it might change the conditions for your family's future. Maybe it's looking up a therapist's name. It's no rainbow promising hope, but it is a notable commitment to hope. Maybe we create a memory for someone of hearing our voice during Yom Kippur, saying, I'm sorry, saying, I love you, that will find its greatest use some many years down the road. We could create miraculous things here, Bein Hashmashot, miraculous for our lives and miraculous for the world. I pray that we do, that our creations are unexpected and transformational and surprising and strange and loving and courageous and hopeful and visionary here in liminal time. And that our teva can help us make it this long way through until the time comes to put our creations to extraordinary use. And I pray that whatever storm is tossing you around right now treats you gently, is no match for your teva, and gives way to a future that you have shaped, that we have shaped. Amen and Gemar Chatima Tova.